guys, welcome back to the Her Faith Inspires podcast. Today I have a really fun guest, Tm Barnett, otherwise known as Mr. B from Red Pin Logic, who I do share a lot of his stuff because, he just helps you think well about things that people are not thinking well about. And I'm excited to have him on. We're going to talk today about deconstruction and then maybe even get to some of the questions that you guys had. And so I'm going to bring Tim on and he can tell us about what he does and just introduce himself. Tim, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
Yeah, I share a lot of your stuff and I see that I think it's you, if you run your own social media page, you'll go in and like you click on that, and it's caused me to go do it if somebody shares my stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's cool that people are like, thanks for sharing it, kind of. So I think that's cool that you do that.
It's, I try my best now with the different platforms. I'm constantly, okay, Instagram, then you jump over to Facebook, then you go to TikTok, then you go to YouTube. And it can be overwhelming, especially when there's like tens of thousands and even hundreds of thousands now that follow some of these platforms.
Yeah.
So if you don't get a message from me, don't take it personally. There are so many messages that come in. And my full-time job would just be responding to those messages. I would never create another video if that's all I did. So please, people, don't take offense. I do my best. If someone shares, I'm like, hey, thanks, or like, this kind of thing. But sometimes, you can't get to it every time.
Yeah, I think you do a pretty good job. So thank you for noticing when people do that. I think that's really, it keeps you grounded. So
yeah,
can you
totally.
just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do? Because I know a lot of people are familiar with you that listen to me, but for those who aren't.
Yeah, so let's go back. I was raised in a Christian home. And actually, this relates to why I'm into apologetics. It wasn't because my parents were into apologetics and theology and all that stuff. In fact, I never heard anything about, deep theology or apologetics growing up. I didn't know any apologist, nor what the word even meant. It wasn't actually until I got into university studying physics at a secular university here in Canada, and I'm inundated with friends. And they were friends. It wasn't like just acquaintances. These were my friends who were atheists and Jewish and Muslim, you name it. Very diverse university. And they were challenging me or asking me questions, I should say. And I, felt them as a challenge. Hey, Tim, why are you a Christian? And the best I could do at the time when that came up was, well, because my parents are Christians. That's why I'm a Christian. And I knew that was not a good answer right away. In fact, it was embarrassing. So I went home and started investigating some of these challenges, some of these claims. And of course, at that time, the new atheists were on the rise: Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett. There's a whole bunch of guys who were very vocal about their atheism. And they were actually trying to talk people out of their faith. And to be honest, I probably was a good candidate for leaving the faith at that point because my faith was so shallow. Fortunately, though, I discovered through Google and YouTube some apologists out there, and started kind of devouring their material and looking into their best arguments and then the counter arguments to those. And I became convinced that Christianity is actually true. And so apologetics for me was like the thing that gave my faith life. People ask, were you really a Christian growing up? I think I was, but it was like crayon Christianity. It was real Sunday school Christianity. I knew Bible stories because we were in church on Sunday and we did the youth group thing and we went to conferences and that kind of thing. But it wasn't a deep, robust faith that could handle the challenges that were out there. So what I do now is, okay, I went, got my degree in physics and math. Like, who would do that, right? But that's because I wanted to become a high school science and math teacher, and did that for a number of years, both in the Christian school system, the public school system, which, man, that was a trip here in Canada. And but with the goal actually to become an apologist. I was kind of like, I love teaching, but I fell in love with teaching apologetics. So what started as a hobby, started to get some traction. And there's a whole story, a God thing there that led me to doing this full time. And now I get to travel around the US and Canada, training Christians. with a defense for like the why for their faith. And I love speaking to young people because I see myself in the pew.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
like, and I didn't have access to this stuff. And so, man, it gets me super pumped up when I get to see, hey, there's like a little Tim Barnett sitting there
Yeah.
who maybe had no idea this stuff actually existed. And I get to be the guy to explain this to them. So that's kind of neat. And then you mentioned Red Pen Logic, which most people know me from. That's kind of how, things blew up. The reason I got a book deal on deconstruction, I mean, all that stuff kind of happened because of this thing called social media and Red Pen Logic. So during the pandemic, couldn't travel for work. That was my main thing, teaching, speaking. So how do we communicate to people when I'm stuck in my office here? Well, we turned on a camera like a lot of people did, and started making videos. And that got the attention of some people like Mike Winger and some others. And they shared my stuff, talk about sharing and liking and
Mhm.
commenting. And that these were people that basically overnight took Red Pen Logic from, a handful of subscribers to tens of thousands of subscribers. And and so now, man, I tried my best to continue to do all the work that I'm supposed to be doing, teaching, speaking. But once a week, I'll sit down in this office and record a video or two, and just trying to respond to some of the nonsense that's out there. And there's a lot of nonsense. And
Sure.
that's kind of how Red Pen Logic was born. I'm a teacher. Man, we correct students' work because we
Yeah.
care,
Mhm.
because we don't want people taken in by bad thinking. So I saw, some stuff online that I thought, man, what would it look like to take a red pen to this?
Mm.
And that's what we did. And, people were like, I learned something. I
Yeah.
knew it was wrong, but I didn't know why it was wrong. You helped me see that. Keep doing that, and so we're going to keep doing that as long as we are able. So that's kind of like the story kind of in a nutshell. Where I come from. I have a beautiful wife and three beautiful little girls,
Mm.
and I feel very blessed with my family and to be doing the work that I get to do every day.
That's awesome. That's very creative too, to take your teaching background and to just make it a part of what you do on social media. I think that's why it's so authentic. And you're very I don't, you can connect with your audience. I think when people watch it, they listen to you, you're very non-threatening. You also seem very joyful when you do it. So I think that that's a good balance. And one of the things I teach an introduction to logic with
Hmm.
the middle schoolers with online Christian courses, which was with Dr. Frank Turk's, I think,
Oh,
sister
cool.
company, right? But
Yeah.
we showed one of your videos with the apple, you're eating the apple and you're showing the guy who's super chill, just asking questions to
Yeah.
being interviewed by the media who seems very hostile. Seems like the American
Hmm.
media, to be honest, like, so I live here in America, but
Yeah.
it's like it's very similar, but it's just very, it's like, it's so creative. It's, you put a spin on it that I think is just draws people in, and it makes it, yes, you're learning, but you're captivating the audience to where they stick with you through the entire message. And it's very cool to see that. So
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. I mean, we work really hard to make the answers come across like in 2 minutes,
yeah,
clear, concise, you can follow along. I make it clear to people, I'm not just opening up my phone and responding in the moment because
right.
you'd get probably a 10-minute video. I want to make it concise. Let's get to the point. We can't respond to everything in the video because we're trying to keep it a tight, shorter style video. You want long content, go to Mike Winger,
Yeah, yeah.
you want short, stick around, follow Mr. B. So, and we also attack ideas, not individuals.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
that's, again, we work really hard at that. And there is something really, maybe even triggering, to some people when they see the red pen, like there's a lot of ink on that. Man, it looks like a crime scene or something. But we're just trying to take on the ideas. And so my hope is that people don't see me as like, man, look at Mr. B is trying to like dunk on this person, or they're trying to destroy this person. There's lots of people out there, doing that, and they'll title their videos, blank destroys,
Yeah.
annihilates so and so. And we don't do that. We're just trying to take on the ideas that these people hold because we think they're bad. So we're correcting the bad thinking using good thinking. And then, we try to look like we're having fun. I am having fun
Yeah.
doing it. And sometimes people think, oh,
Hmm.
he's so smug. I'm just a smiley person. I honestly,
Yeah.
I don't take myself super seriously. And so, if people see me crack a smile or something, it's not because I'm like, trying
Oh,
to be
gotcha.
a jerk or, that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I think you're going to have with a red pen, there's going to be an intimidation factor of some sort because we all know what it was like to get a test handed back to us with
Yeah.
red markings all over it. And you're like, shoot,
Mm.
I know what that means. It means error.
Yeah.
It means I made a
Mm.
mistake and the teacher is correcting it. So I think that with that, but we all at the same time recognize that. We recognize that
Hmm.
as being a correction. And I think for the people who have very short attention spans, it gives them quick corrections on thinking in real time. And I also appreciate that you said you're not answering back really quickly in a comment section. There takes some thought into some of these things and how to respond. And a
Yeah.
lot of times social media just wants you to answer back quick. And it promotes that fact that we have to think through some of the things that we're gonna respond with. So I think all around it's a very good.
Well, you're gonna have to have me on again because I want to go. I know we want to get to some other stuff, but
Yeah.
um, there you mentioned kind of your background there in doing some education stuff.
Mhm.
And I'm working on another book project.
Mm.
And it's actually what my goal is to show people how they can be a red pen thinker,
Mm.
how they can do exactly what I'm doing. And there's some steps that I follow when I go through this process. And so it's kind of a book teaching people to think critically, but it's also apologetics. But it's also more of a workbook. Like
Oh,
you're
wow.
going to do red pens in this book.
Mm.
So that's kind of, I mean, I haven't, talked much about that because
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
very early in the stages. But my hope is that, man, the kingdom, I mean, there's lots of great books out there written on
Yeah.
different things. And there's kind of I think a need, especially right now, to
Mhm.
get back to thinking better. And we're
Yes,
just
yes,
not, especially if you've been public school trained like I was,
yes, yes, I
you
was.
were never taught this stuff.
Nope,
There
nope.
is no logic. I didn't know about logical fallacies until I was like doing my master's in philosophy. You know what I'm saying? And that
Yeah,
should
yeah.
not be the case.
No.
You should, my girls are at a classical Christian school. And so they're at the logic stage and they're going in the rhetoric stage. And it's like, they know about more fallacies
Mhm.
than, most philosophers do. So it's just really cool. And it's like, how do we get our Christian brothers and sisters to understand this stuff, but in a fun way?
Yeah,
So
that's
we're
exciting.
working on that. And when that comes out,
Yeah.
I can't wait. Yeah.
No, that I can tell you right now, I will buy that book and promote that with my own students because there are so many people that are asking, how do I learn to think better? How do I, and we don't emphasize, and I know we're going to talk about deconstruction. We will get to it, I
Mm,
promise. But
yeah.
we don't emphasize in the church because I grew up in the church as well. And you're right, I was trained public education. That's where I got my teaching credential was in California. I was in California public school system up
Wow.
until a few years ago. We moved to the South, but we don't, we're, as Christians, I never really heard the talk of love God with your mind. It was always heart talk. Give God your
Mm,
heart, love
mhm.
God with all your heart. And so Christians don't even know where to think through some of this. How do I love God with my mind? And
Mhm.
there's as a student, there is work as a student. It's not going to always be fun. It's not going to always be entertainment. I mean, sometimes we try to think of how do we get our student to buy into this with a hook, but the
Yeah.
student also has to want to work through the hard stuff to learn how to think
Yeah.
better. Like for
Yeah.
you make it look easy because we see all the markings and it comes at us on our news or our feed for social media,
Mhm.
but the work that it takes behind the scenes is something that we all have to want to put into it.
Yeah.
So I think the
Yeah.
book sounds like it's going to be fantastic. I'm excited. I can't wait. Yeah, we'll definitely have to have
Cool.
you back on. All right.
Sweet.
So we're talking about deconstruction today.
Mhm.
I've had somebody on, but it's been a while. And before we get into all the meat of it, can you just, when we talk about deconstruction within the context of Christianity, what are we talking about when we say that term?
Yeah, this is the $1 million question. It was actually the hardest thing in this whole book project. And Elisa Childers and I spent a lot of time writing this thing. Well, probably a year researching and then writing. There was probably a 2-year project.
Yeah.
And, we got 65,000 words in our book, and these were the hardest words to write. This was the hardest sentence.
Mm,
What is deconstruction? Because it seems like, everyone's using the word to mean different things. You could ask 10 different people and they may give you like 10 different descriptions or definitions. Some people using the word to mean, hey, I'm just asking questions about my faith, and others using it to mean I'm leaving the faith altogether. I mean, that's a huge spectrum,
yeah.
right? Asking
Yeah.
questions all the way to leaving. So like Joshua Harris, for example, man, if you grew up kind of a teenager in the 90s, you know about Joshua Harris. He wrote the book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Well, on Instagram a couple of years ago, he announced that he's kissing his marriage goodbye. And that was like huge news because this guy wrote the book on how to
Yeah.
have a lasting relationship. Okay, what went wrong? Well, the next week he posts on Instagram, what I left out of my announcement is that I've deconstructed my faith. And he said, the biblical phrase is falling away. Those are his words. So he was using it to mean that.
Mm,
What we discovered was, and here's another thing. We tried initially, if you were to see our notes, our research, our writing, Elisa and I were actually using adjectives to kind of qualify the word deconstruction. So we would say like, there's good deconstruction or healthy deconstruction, and then there's bad deconstruction or unhealthy deconstruction. That's how we started. But we eventually changed our mind because we spent so much time looking at the deconstruction hashtag and what was going on in the online world, the online community. And what we found is there was some definite fundamental markers to deconstruction that couldn't just be ignored. You couldn't just say deconstruction's neutral and it's just, how you do it. The two essential elements to deconstruction had to do with truth and authority. For one, when it came to truth about religion, like Christianity, it seemed like truth is just relative. I mean, it's what's true for you, but maybe not for me. So
mm,
your truth might be Jesus, good for you. My truth is, and then whatever.
right.
So that kind of postmodern or relativistic thinking about religion um, was pretty evident. And that's why it didn't really matter. It was interesting. It didn't matter where you ended up in deconstruction as long as you were happy, So some people might land in a different type of faith. Some people might land in atheism, agnosticism. And then it's like whatever destination you land in is valid,
Mm,
and to be respected is how they put it. Well, how does that make sense? Well, it only makes sense because truth, there is no capital T truth when it comes to this. It's kind of like, by the way, it's kind of like your vacation destination. Like, what is the true vacation destination? What is the right vacation destination? Well, that's a weird question to ask because vacations depend on you personally, your preferences. Somebody might like Hawaii. Someone might like, because they like the beach.
mhm,
Someone might like to hike, so they want the Grand Canyon. That's the true for them vacation. Again, that's personal preference stuff. That's not capital T objective truth stuff. The second thing was authority. It became clear that the Bible was not an authority when it came to their deconstruction process. And so here's how we define the terms. After we kind of went through and acknowledging people use the word different ways, but the primary and most nefarious form of deconstruction online is a postmodern process of rethinking your faith. So it's all about your faith,
mhm,
but without requiring scripture as a standard.
mm,
So if you're doing that, we call that deconstruction. If you're not doing that, you care about truth and you care about what the Bible has to say,
mm,
well, then you're not deconstructing, you're doing something else. We call that reforming your faith. other people have called it other things. Okay. So that's kind of just kind of set the table there. That's the kind of general definition that we use. And it's interesting because we've had pushback, but we've also had people say, yeah, you know, um, that is pretty much it. I don't believe that there's a right place to land. There's no true religion. And frankly, you got to reject the Bible. It's full of toxic beliefs.
Mm.
And so they acknowledge those two pillars of deconstruction, whether they, like us or not, kind of thing.
So what's the pushback? Like, no, that's not it, or because they don't
Yeah,
understand
so
the Bible's, not an authority. Like, what's the pushback on it?
I think the pushback mostly is from people who maybe actually care about what actually is
Mm,
true.
okay.
And in that case, what we're saying is great. We're
Mhm.
glad that you care about truth. What we're saying is you should probably use a different term,
Mm,
because what is happening is there's just confusion.
yeah.
When we, and this is kind of the limitation of language, right? When you start using words that have multiple meanings,
Mhm.
you can end up creating equivocations. You can end up confusing people, um, and and so there are right-hearted evangelical Christians out there, pastors at their pulpit, and they may say things like, "Hey, deconstruction's happening, and we should all be deconstructing too." Now, in the first sense, or they might be talking about people leaving the church, like Joshua Harris. Deconstruction's happening all around. Okay. And you all should be deconstructing. Now, what the pastor typically, what they probably mean in that is like, get your Bible out, and let's be like the Bereans and
Mhm.
search the scriptures to see if you got questions, you have doubts. Let's tackle those head on, knowing that there is a truth to the matter, and God, as an authority, can tell us what the true beliefs are in this matter. Of course, that's a totally different process. So here's the thing, and this became clear, I still remember I was in my office here. I'm reading about Derrida. So Derrida was a postmodern French philosopher, and he is like the father of deconstruction, but not like faith deconstruction, like postmodern deconstruction, which is kind of a different thing, but it's related. And how Derrida and some of his disciples, how they describe deconstruction is not a that, but a how. It's a methodology. It's a process. So I was reading a book by a guy named John Caputo. He's a philosopher, and he wrote a book called "What Would Jesus Deconstruct?" And he's taking Derrida's ideas and he's applying them to faith. Now, most people don't know who John Caputo is or read his books. They're a little bit more academic. But this guy you could tell he's had an influence. And if you follow some of the deconstructionists, they know who John Caputo is. And Caputo is basically saying the same thing, that it's a how. It's how you go about assessing and believing. So in this case, the people who are deconstructing, the deconstructor, is going through a process. And what we're saying is there's a process called deconstruction. Don't do it.
Mhm.
It's a process that doesn't care about capital T truth because it doesn't believe that it
Mhm.
exists when it comes to religion. It's also a process that doesn't think that the Bible is an authority.
Mhm.
So you're gonna live that out a certain way. You're gonna come to who's going to be the authority then? Well, if it's not the Bible, something else has to.
Sure.
And typically that's the self. I'm going to determine what's authoritative for me.
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
need the book. I don't need a book or a how-to on doing this. I'll do it my way.
Mm.
And that's why you have people like the Naked Pastor. Um, we name him in the book because whether he likes it or not, he has an influence, and he does a lot of videos on deconstruction. And by the way, don't Google Naked Pastor. Okay. That's going to get you in a
Yeah.
world of trouble.
Yeah.
Okay. You don't know what's going to pop up. But he says there's no right way to do this, nor is there a right destination.
Mm.
Then he says, you do you.
Mm.
Okay. Talk about like a phrase that
Yeah.
kind of like shows where the culture's at. Um, when he says there's no right way, well, that is the way, that is the methodology. It basically says, hey, just do whatever. And what we're saying is, no, there is a right way to do this. If you're going to handle your faith, if you really care about your faith, then like a surgeon who's operating on a heart, there's a right way to do this, and there's a wrong way to do it. And if you do it the wrong way, you're dead. And that's why in the book we talk about Elisa when she wrote her book Another Gospel. She called her journey deconstruction. And she said it was like I was dissecting my beliefs. Well, she changed her mind about that. It's not just dissecting your beliefs. Dissection works on something dead. I was a biology teacher, and we dissected frogs and worms and fetal pigs. All of those things were dead when we got them. Okay. And so the students, if they made a mistake, no big deal. Like, you lose some marks. Okay.
Right.
We're cutting that heart out. Make sure you don't nick the heart. But if I brought in a live pig and then we sedated it, and then we cut it open, and this is vivisection. This is an operation. This is not dissection. You make the wrong move with that scalpel, pig's dead. That's what deconstruction is like, because your faith isn't just a list of beliefs. And if you treat it like that, you don't get Christianity. It is a list. There are beliefs, but those beliefs are directly related to a relationship. So your faith is more like marriage. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, I believe things about my wife and they inform my relationship to her. And if I have bad beliefs, well, that is going to affect my relationship. But man, it's if you start doing this a certain way, interacting with your faith a certain way, you could kill the relationship. Just like someone who believes and acts a certain way could kill their marriage. And by the way, I think there's a reason why people online who have these massive deconstruction platforms, it's like they are a divorcee. And I'm not trying to like put people down if they've been divorced or whatever, like how they might act, but I know people. I was a marriage pastor at my church for 7 years. Okay. And I watched people, Christians, who divorced their spouses, and it was ugly. And there was so much resentment. These people couldn't be in the same room together. There was so much animosity. And then I look at, and imagine that person started a social media platform that was dedicated to putting down their wife and their former relationship with their wife. That's what it looks like online in some of these platforms. They get up every day and make a meme or a video that is ridiculing or challenging, and they don't give Christianity the benefit of the doubt. In fact, most of the time it's a straw man. They misrepresent because they are so wounded, and so bitter. That's not everybody. It's not everybody. Hear me, people. But I'm just saying, if you can't see that, I don't know. I can't help you, because to me, it's clear that is some of these, it's like, what's going on? Okay. So, and that goes back to what I was just saying. There's a relationship involved, and people are not just logic machines. And so it's not just like, oh, I don't believe this anymore. Okay, I'm going to believe that still. It's not like that when it comes to your faith. At least it shouldn't be, because it's more than that.
That was very powerful. I think that was probably the most succinct description or definition of deconstruction I've heard. And it makes it make sense, and you can see the danger in it as well. And so, yeah, thanks for making that so clear. I actually read a post Natasha Crane posted, some conversation she was having on X with Preston Sprinkle. Have you heard of him or no? Okay, yeah. So I looked him up because I never heard of him. I'm not on X. I just can't handle another social media platform, to be honest with you. And that's not one I'm
Yeah.
going to choose if I could. But
Yeah.
she was saying that he posted, um, and it says here, I looked him up. He says he's a biblical scholar, a
Hmm.
theologian, a speaker, podcaster, or whatever. But he posted, right-wing Republican-only Christianity has contributed significantly to younger people deconstructing from the faith.
Hmm.
Um, and so I have two questions about that because he is associating deconstruction with this, I want to know if he's associating it with like a political party and being super
Sure.
conservative Christians. But do you
Yeah.
see deconstruction happening within specific generations? Like, I don't know that this is like a boomer thing or a Gen
Hmm.
X thing. It seems like it's more of a newer, although,
Hmm.
Harris was, I guess maybe he is Gen X because if he's in the
Hmm.
90s. Um,
Yeah.
so that's one question. The second question is, does it really have anything to do with, a party affiliation, conservatism, liberalism? Um, can you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. So let's take each of these. The first is a sociological challenge, or a question. And I don't know the sociological research on this. I'm not sure if it's even been done. As far as like, okay, what's the demographics for people deconstructing?
Mhm.
Is deconstruction, people using that term, are they mostly Gen Z? Or is it, and my suspicion, again, I'm just going to say anecdotally, I've seen it across the generations. Okay. So you see boomers for sure.
Mhm.
You see, but then you also see it all the way to the kind of Gen Z and now Gen Alpha coming up.
Mhm.
So I think that it's not precisely. Here's what I think is impacting whether it's a boomer thing or a Gen Z or anyone in between. Um, is how much you're on social media.
Mhm.
Because I think what's new about this, of course, people weren't using the term deconstruction 20 years ago. It
Right.
just wasn't a term that was being used. Now, was there still people questioning their faith and leaving their faith and all that stuff? Of course. It's been
Mhm.
happening since the beginning, you know?
Sure. Sure.
And it was happening in the first century. We read about it, different people who left the faith, recorded there in Paul's letters. So and people left Jesus. They would follow for a bit, they were gone. Jesus talks about the parable of the soils. He says, man, there's people who's like that rocky soil, they spring up
Mhm.
and receive the word with joy. And then he says they fall away. That's
Yeah.
him interpreting the parable. I think what's new is that this is more of a social media phenomenon.
Mhm.
What I mean by that is it's happening like you don't just deconstruct, but you go online to your Instagram or your Facebook or your TikTok or whatever, and you announce to the world that you are deconstructing, that you're whatever, maybe you're leaving or you're heading in a different direction. So that is, I think, this new phenomenon. And part of social media is the social part. It's the community. So when someone deconstructs, they aren't alone. When you go online to announce your deconstruction, you now are affirmed by hundreds and sometimes thousands of people and welcomed into this new community of people who have conferences and have coaches. Like
Mhm.
there's deconstruction coaches, there's deconstruction conferences. There's there's like this space for you where I don't think that existed. I mean, 20 years ago, if you deconstructed or whatever word they use to describe the same thing,
Mhm.
where did you go? How did you connect with people who've done the same thing? It was a lot harder.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what's I think new. And so if you're a boomer and you're not on social media, you probably won't even use the term deconstruction, and you may end up, just quietly deconstructing without actually connecting with others. If you're on social media though, and you're seen and you're on your feed, and man, if I watch The Naked Pastor, you better believe that the next 10 videos are all related
Mm-hmm.
to this kind of deconstruction. So you kind of like end up in the funnel,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because of the way algorithms work.
Sure.
It works both ways, by the way. You watch a Red Pen Logic video,
Right.
well,
Right.
now you might be in our funnel.
Right.
And by that I mean you might see Mike Winger, or you might see Ruslan, or you may see, I don't know, one of these other people who's going to be defending Christianity. That's kind of how it works. So that's the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the sociological data if it's more of a Gen Z, or if it's a Gen X, or if it's a millennial or boomer, elder, whatever. I think it's happening across the board.
Okay.
The politics thing is a really important part of this, because when you start watching the deconstruction testimonies, so just like you have conversion testimonies, I think these are deconstruction testimonies. Someone gets online and they share why they left the faith, or why they've deconstructed their faith, or whatever. And those are powerful. I've had so many people reach out to me after watching someone talk about their deconstruction and say, man, now it's got me questioning.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something about these testimonies that can actually cause other people to deconstruct. Just like hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe people have heard that expression. Deconstructed people help deconstruct people, whether they realize it or not. You know, you make a
Right.
video,
Right.
there's something persuasive about that. So the whole time, and I've seen these videos where people are like, don't just deconstruct because I'm deconstructed. Like they're saying it, but then here's all my reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And look at this Bible contradiction. Look at this other thing. Look at this other thing. And you can't help. Now you are making a case. You are being an
Sure.
apologist in a
Right.
sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? For this new thing that you're a part of. Lots of people in their stories talk about 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happened in 2016? Well, I'm Canadian, you know, and I know what happened in 2016.
Yeah.
So there for a lot of people, it was like, how could this be?
Mm-hmm.
And because they saw the church get really political and behind a certain candidate, and they were like, well, how come this candidate, like I think you're being hypocritical. I think you're being inconsistent. I think you're being, and that started them on this as part of the thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And because it turns out hypocrisy has always been a problem in the church, because Christians are sinners. And I mean, it's a problem for everyone. Everyone lives inconsistently at times. And so because Christians were held to this standard and people thought that they weren't living up to it, that got them down that road into deconstruction. At least that's what they're saying. Okay, I'm just reporting here. So 2016 politics, and it's true. There are times where it's like cringe, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where politics and Christianity can get really kind of messy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying Christians shouldn't vote or be political. Politics is about policy, and policy is about what's good for the country,
Sure.
good for the citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is something we should all care about big time. So I'm not trying to like say that. I'm just saying this is one of the reasons you could call it a crisis. So in our book, we outline there's the crisis and then the deconstruction. And the crisis might be politics and how, you know, the church has or their local church has kind of like got involved in politics in a certain way. Suffering and evil, church abuse, like church hurt. Man, my pastor cheated on his wife. I can't believe it. Or my pastor molested someone. I can't believe it. So there's legit, like, this is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And you could go down the list. There's lots of different things that can cause someone to end up in a crisis, and then how they respond to that. The how can be deconstruction, or it could be something else. And for a lot of people, they go down the deconstruction route. So yeah, I don't know if you want to talk more about that, the politics stuff, but it's
no, I think I was just wondering if there was like a correlation, which it sounds like there is for a reason why people might deconstruct. But my other question, or my next question, was going to be, what are some reasons people deconstruct? But you're saying what you guys have identified as the crisis, like a crisis in the book, is
Yeah.
maybe the reason that spurs them on to start unraveling this whole thing.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it and what I would want to just reiterate here is or make really clear is the crisis doesn't have to land you in deconstruction,
Mm,
because there are people that are part of churches that, man, they get really political. Like, let's
mhm,
get political candidates, and Sunday morning instead of sermon, we're going to give you a political speech, or we got a church cross on the front, and then we have right next to it, some kind of flag. And it doesn't have to be an American flag. It could be like a party flag. You know
right.
what I'm saying? Like, there's some there's some wild stuff out there. Um, and this is where, I think we just need to be careful.
Mhm.
Jesus is the savior of the world. There is no political candidate who's going to save this world.
Right,
They're
right.
going to hopefully do more good than evil. I mean, that's the goal.
Mhm,
But we just got to remember that. And, people are more concerned with making converts to the party than
mhm.
converts to Christ. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So that's where politics, I think, gets elevated to religion status or above. And by the way, it's what's ironic about some of this is those same people who are like, man, I'm so upset about 2016 or some other, thing that happened with the church and politics. When they leave, when they deconstruct and they end up saying, I'm done with Christianity, they become super political,
Mhm.
but just not right politics. It's all left politics.
Right, right.
And so when you follow, again, I'm just speaking anecdotally, when you follow some of these accounts, they talk a ton about politics, and they're champions for whoever is on the other side.
Mhm.
And so it's not like they got less political or they were like, man, I'm so upset about the church being political. Well, you're super political now. So it's just you had a problem with that kind of politics.
Mhm.
And that gets to, I think, maybe a deeper issue than just the church, talking about politics. Again, it's a big deal. It's messy. It's messy because of the nature of how politics works,
Yeah.
and the mudslinging, um and the
Yeah.
now it's like name calling, and it's
Yeah.
hard to know what's true and what's not true. There's so much out there where you can have a debate happening, and they're saying this happened, and they're saying that didn't happen, and it's like, wait a second, how can you both be on stage and saying contradictory things?
Mhm.
Someone is obviously not telling the truth. So how do we even assess this? And where do I even go to get that information? Like,
Right.
am I supposed to trust this news outlet, or am I supposed to trust this one? I
Right.
mean, it becomes so, I mean, it's the Wild West right now when it comes
Mhm.
to some of this stuff.
Yeah. You got
Um,
to prepare yourself for an election year and all the crazy that's going to come with it, because
yeah,
that's just seems to be the nature of it all. And then you have heightened, people have their political opinions anyway, so you have
yeah,
a heightened frustrations, and
hmm,
you're going to have these disagreements even within people within the church. Like, there's a
yeah.
lot of, I was reading Barna's statistics the other day. I think there's going to be 31 million Christians in America who will not vote because they're just like,
Wow.
I don't, they're, I don't think it'll work if I vote. Both candidates are evil. You get the
Mm,
pretty much the typical sayings or typical
yeah.
reasons. So yeah, I do get that. But when you're saying too that people will go on and say, hey, don't deconstruct just because I did, but there's contradictions
Mm,
here, there's, and they give all these reasons. Are those reasons the reason they started to deconstruct,
mm,
or are they finding these reasons after they decided to, like, you know what I
mm.
mean? Like, it's really easy to
Yeah.
get that confirmation bias. Oh yeah, here I
Yeah.
got, all these reasons that I left Christianity
Mm,
after the fact to just make it seem like you made a good decision.
hmm.
But are those the primary reasons people are starting that path to deconstruction, or is there something else that takes place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's going to depend on the person. And this works both ways too. It's like, are you a Christian because of the reasons,
Mm,
or because you were raised in a Christian home?
mhm.
And my answer is, well, like, kind of yes to both.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I was raised in a Christian home. Obviously, I can't deny that influence, but I did my best to try to survey the evidence for Christianity, trying to be as open and honest. But I realize I'm, a biased person like anyone else,
Mhm,
and it's hard to sometimes put that bias to the side. So I end up discovering these arguments. Well, did that just confirm what I already believe? So is that a confirmation bias? Um, I don't think so, but someone might say it is. And so
mhm,
the real reason they'd say is because you were born into a Christian home.
mhm,
Okay, fair enough. You want to say that. So I want to be careful, because when I look at some of these stories, you're exactly right. There's lots of people who deconstruct, and then they start reporting, well, look at all these contradictions, or look at this argument from divine hiddenness or problem of evil or whatever. But when they were started this, the reason they left wasn't because of those things, because they couldn't articulate those challenges,
mhm,
or maybe they didn't even know about those challenges.
mhm,
So, whereas there may be someone who really is kind of thoughtfully going through. I think it's, again, I mentioned earlier, we're not logic machines. And so there are going to be lots of factors involved.
mhm, mhm.
Deconstruction is not merely an intellectual endeavor. Like I am merely deconstructing or dissecting beliefs and picking, but that's how it's often put. We have a will. I have
Mhm,
a will, so does everybody else. I have emotions, so does everyone else. And there are things, I mean, I know people who have deconstructed,
mhm,
um, like close to me, and it had nothing to do with the intellectual stuff. They couldn't care less about the intellectual stuff. But it has to do with, I now identify this way sexually.
mhm,
And so I'm done with going to church.
mhm.
I've and I'm just speaking from what I've seen for some people,
Right.
and that is a very real thing.
Mhm.
I'm done. And if you were to ask them, well, what do you think about, like, you don't believe the resurrection anymore? Like, what would be your reasons?
Yeah,
Like they wouldn't even, like, what are you talking about?
sure.
It's because of this, and sexuality and gender are massive.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
mean, those are what people are now talking about.
mhm.
Those are like the apologetic issues of our day,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
It's not like Trinity stuff. It's not like, I mean, we still talk about incarnation, Trinity. You're with the Muslim, that's going to come up
Mhm,
because you have some common ground about some of these other social issues. But when it comes to just like kind of your average young Christian, they want to know what the Bible says about sexuality and gender.
mhm,
And if it doesn't align with their personal beliefs or what, the culture, then those are toxic.
mhm,
You're this, and this. You're homophobic, you're a bigot, you're intolerant. I mean, all the names.
mhm, mhm.
And it's not a question of what does the Bible say. And if you get far enough down here, it's, well, Paul was wrong anyways. Doesn't
Mm.
matter what Paul
Yeah,
said.
yeah, that's
So
kind of cool.
there are some who are willing to are trying to argue, well, Paul really meant this other kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that kind of argument's taking place. But when you read John Caputo, who is the Derrida, like he's the Jacques Derrida scholar, and he's looking at deconstruction in terms of that. He says at the end of his book, "What would Jesus deconstruct?" He says Jesus and Paul, man, they were Jewish. They held to the Jewish view of homosexuality, which was, this is wrong. This is sinful. Doesn't matter who you're engaged with, how much you love each other, how committed you are, this behavior is sinful. Okay, he acknowledges that's what they would have believed then. But what do? You deconstruct. The truth has actually never arrived and never does arrive when it comes to this stuff, because you're able to bring meaning to the text. So what does he do? He says, well, if we apply a hermeneutic of love, Jesus said, love your neighbor. Okay, well, what does that look like today? Paul and Jesus would affirm today, they would be gay affirming when it comes to these issues. They would be marching in the Pride Parade. That's
Mhm.
And that's how you get there. So again, it's like, it doesn't matter what Paul actually was trying to instruct us on. We can just say he was wrong. And if he were alive today, or if he was alive today, he would change his mind. So again, remember, that's the authority part. So
Yeah.
there's the truth part, there's the authority part.
Mm.
And yeah.
That's really good. So before the podcast started, I was going to ask you if there is a healthy way to deconstruct, but now I'm not going to ask you that anymore because you basically said no. But I was
Yeah.
reading, and I read Nabil Qureshi's Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. Have you read
Yeah.
that book?
Yeah.
Okay, so he was a
Yeah.
Muslim. He was actually
Mhm.
born into a Muslim family and raised that,
That's right.
reciting the Quran and all this. And I'm reading it again with my 14-year-old right now. But what would you call that process
Mm.
that Nabil's going through? Because he said it was one of the most difficult times of his life to,
Mhm.
realize that, wait, we've been wrong and Christianity is true, and then convert to Christianity. What would you kind of call that process? I mean, I know this is
Yeah,
kind of hard,
that's
Tim, because I'm not preparing you for any of these questions, but
no,
my
no.
mind's just kind of
Yeah,
going. So,
sure. So I may call it just reforming your beliefs,
mhm,
um, or I don't know, just like seeking the truth.
yeah.
I know when you read Ginger Duggar's book,
Mhm,
so she was part of the 18 Kids and Counting TV
mhm.
show, and or maybe it was 19. I don't know how many
Yeah, I think
kids
it
they
was
had.
19. Yeah. Maybe they
Yeah,
had more after
so
the 19. I don't know.
they might have, but she went through. There was a lot of false beliefs that she was taught
Yeah.
growing up. And what's fascinating is you see her today, and she is a strong
Mhm.
evangelical Christian. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if maybe she wouldn't use evangelical. I mean, that word I think has lost its meaning too. By
Sure.
the way,
Sure.
but and that's a whole other discussion.
Mhm.
But people I think understand what I mean by that.
Right.
And she calls it disentangling your beliefs. So there were beliefs that, like, because there was true beliefs kind of tangled in there, but she had to figure out, okay, which ones are true
Mhm.
and which ones are not true.
Mhm.
And we all have to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
look I
Yeah.
was taught by my parents that Santa was real.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was also taught by my parents that brushing your teeth prevents cavities.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's like two beliefs that were given to me, and I received them as a kid, like I received my Christmas presents. Like,
Right.
okay, Santa's real. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Now I need to go investigate these things.
Mhm.
I mean, my parents taught me that cracking my knuckles would
Yes.
cause arthritis,
Yeah.
and that's not true.
Mhm.
And they taught me that crossing my eyes would make them stay that way. Not true.
Yeah.
And they taught me that sitting too close to the TV would hurt my eyes. Well, guess what? Now I stand like this in front of my phone,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
hurting my eyes. They said if I swallowed my gum, it would stay in my stomach. And everyone who's listening to this podcast is going to say 7 years. Well, how did that? I mean, that is not a real thing. If you
Right.
swallow your gum, you could try this at home. Here's a little experiment. Swallow your gum. You will find it in the next couple of days. Okay. Because
Okay.
that's how your digestive system works.
Yeah.
So there's lots of false beliefs that we, take in. The way so our job is to figure out what's true and what's
Mhm.
not. And that's a
Mhm.
lifelong process. No one's
Yeah.
arrived, okay, when it comes to that.
Mhm.
I don't have a perfect theology, and there are things that I believe currently today that likely I won't hold to 10 years from now,
Yeah.
because I'm doing my best to get closer to the truth
Mhm.
as I go. And so so we call that in the book, we say, look, if you're a Christian, you are a follower of Jesus, we want you to do reforming your faith or reformation. And so we're kind of like, my Catholic friends may not like that, but it's, like, what did Martin Luther do? What he was trying to do was check the current belief system and see what aligns with scripture. And so it was always about, okay, is this align with scripture? Does this align with scripture? Does this align with scripture? And that was the goal.
Mhm.
Um, and if that's what you're doing, I don't really care what you call it. You can
Yeah.
call it
Yeah.
reforming if you want. Just do that process.
Right. Right.
Um, and rather than this other process, which I think is just going to lead you away from the real truth,
Mhm.
and you're just going to end up following your own desires and your own beliefs.
Right.
You'll have no real anchor.
Mhm.
So that's yeah, that's
And the good thing about
my
that That's really good. I think I like that you said it doesn't matter what you call it, just seek the capital T truth. And I
Mhm.
think the thing is that for somebody like Nabil, who and even Ginger Duggar, the process of disentangling will be much more difficult when there's so much untruths and there's so much things, so many
Yeah.
things that are false. That will be difficult. That will be, especially when it's part of your identity, like it was Nabil's
Mhm.
families and how it had so much prestige, respect that they were, looked at for knowing the Quran and being able to recite it in a certain way. That's
Yeah.
harder to do because you're not just looking at a belief, you're looking at your identity within that and saying, this is how I was raised to be. That's tough. But it's
Yeah.
okay because, like I said, what we were talking about at the beginning, being a student or somebody who's just wanting to know and learn the truth, you have to be willing to push through and grind through because
Mhm.
on the end of that, like I think it was John Stone Street who says, bad ideas have consequences, or ideas have consequences, bad ideas have victims, or something like that. So
Yeah.
every one of these belief systems is going to lead you to what that final question in the worldview questions of what happens after I die? Where am I going?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have to take it seriously. And I think it's good to just to say
There,
it that way.
there's one distinction between a Nabil story and a Ginger Duggar story, and that is Nabil did not trust the Bible when he started his journey.
Mhm,
In fact, he was taught it's a corrupt book.
mhm, mhm,
Um, Whereas Ginger was taught to revere the Bible, and trust what it says in her family. So this is why I'm a little hesitant to calling what Nabil did reforming, because in our book we say reforming your faith looks like correcting mistaken beliefs
mhm,
to make them align with Scripture. Well, then the question arises, well, what if you don't trust Scripture?
mhm, mhm,
That's where I think what you need to do is you need to go to the apologetic arguments
mhm, mhm,
that are out there. Okay, like ask the question: do I have good reason to trust the Bible? Do I have good reason to believe that this is a book that's not just trustworthy, um, or not just true, but trustworthy, like something I can put authority, that has some authority over me. I got lots of books on my bookshelf and they have true things in them, but it's not like there's some authority that's now over me, when it
right,
comes to
right.
some of that. But there's something different about the Bible.
Mhm, mhm,
So, I mean, this is where that investigation has to come. And so I like what you said, like we're seeking truth,
mhm,
capital T.
mhm,
And it's like this idea, Jesus, the promise, when you seek, you'll find.
mhm.
And it just seems like this really open promise, like if you seek me
Yeah.
with all your heart.
Mhm, mhm,
That's an Old Testament thing and a New Testament thing.
mhm,
And I think that with all your heart part is really important because there's lots of people who are seeking Jesus, but it's not with their whole heart.
mhm,
And man, I in the book we talked about Pilate, not Pilate, Herod, and how he found out about the birth of Jesus, and it says right there in the text he was seeking Jesus, but he was seeking him to kill him.
mhm,
Why? Because Jesus, the newborn king, was a challenge to his throne.
mhm, mhm,
And there's a sense in which Jesus challenges every single one of our thrones. He challenges my throne and he challenges your throne. And so what do you do when there's a challenge to the throne? You either submit or you rebel against it.
mhm.
And and people may use the term, like, lots of people. No one wants to say I'm not a seeker. Everybody wants to say they're a seeker.
Sure.
And so in the book, we talk about seeking answers
Mhm,
and seeking exits.
mhm,
And this goes back to your question about, coming up with like those challenges after the fact. Like, what's the real reason why you deconstructed? Well, there's some people who are seeking exits. So
mhm,
they're going to follow some of these people out there who have big social media platforms. Man, some of these deconstructors and deconstructionists have like hundreds of thousands of followers on YouTube.
mhm,
And people go there. I just got messages like this week
mhm,
from someone saying, "Hey, my daughter's been following this YouTuber,
mhm,
and they're an atheist YouTuber, and they said they were a Christian, now they're not, and they're being influenced by that person." And so my daughter is now, and so is she seeking exits or is she seeking answers? That would be my question.
That's good.
And it's not always easy to know what your heart, it's like introspective stuff. What do I want to be true?
Mm-hmm.
Not that that somehow is going to make it true,
Sure.
but it's like, man, if I don't want this to be true, it's no surprise that you may end up not believing it anymore, you know? And at the same way, if you really want it to be true, maybe it's no surprise that you may end up believing it. So what I'm saying is know your heart in this process.
Mhm. That's good. That was all so good. I mean, the Herod example of why you seeking Jesus, that is like a hit. Like that
Mm.
is like it really
And
gets you.
yeah, and what's interesting, it just occurred to me, and maybe we wrote this in the book, but he says to the Magi that he wants, like, let me know where he is so that I might worship him too.
Mhm,
So there's kind of like, it's like with his mouth, I'm
mhm,
seeking him.
mhm,
Why?
mhm.
Because I want to worship him. But in his heart, that was a lie. He was seeking him
Yeah,
because he wants to get rid of him.
yeah,
So I think that story, I mean, that hits home, I
yeah,
think,
yeah.
in this current movement.
Sure. Very convicting. And I think we all need to answer it no matter what. It's no matter
Yeah,
what you
that's
think,
right.
answer that question. And that's a great way to end the podcast. What is the title of the book again? And
Hmm.
I'm assuming we can find it anywhere books are sold, but tell us
Yeah.
if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So the book is, I better look here. The Deconstruction of Christianity. It's not really a flashy title, but our publisher at Tyndale, they're like, man, if people Google deconstruction
Yeah.
and Christianity, you want your book to come up. So we just call it the Deconstruction of Christianity, what it is, why it's destructive, and how to respond. And
Mm.
so the book is actually broken into 3 parts, what it is, spend a lot of time on that. And we bring the receipts. I mean, there's quote after quote. We cited social media, which, by the way, is weird. Like when I was doing my master's degree, you would never cite anything from social media. Like citing a tweet is just, it seems like wrong. But what we're doing is we're looking at what's going on social media. So there's lots of like, here's what this deconstruction said. Here's what this deconstruction's tweeted. So what it is, why it's destructive. So here are the implications. And then finally, we want people to have hope and know how to respond. And I think there is some hope at the end of the day when it comes to this movement. We're already seeing people who have gone through deconstruction, seen that there's no pot of gold at the end of that rainbow, feeling totally at an end of themselves. I was just in actually it was local. I was at an event, 2 hour drive from me, last week, and I was gonna say young man. He's probably my age actually. He came up to me and said he's a cop, and he basically told me this really heartbreaking story. He kind of deconstructed in his early teens, was reading all the atheists at the time. He wanted nothing to do with Christianity,
Mm.
and the last few years, he's just been feeling the emptiness of
Mm.
his worldview, absolute emptiness to the point of he said like he was ready to hurt himself kind of
Mm.
thing.
Mm.
And he ended up just joking with his wife, who's not a Christian,
Mm.
saying, man, we should like just try going to church. I've tried everything, therapy, I've tried this and this. We should just like go. He went. And so I mean, it was kind of a joke, but they went.
Mm.
And he said that he had this like experience at church, and for the last, I think he said 8 months, he became a Christian
Wow.
8 months ago, or rededicate his life, whatever you want to
Mhm.
call it,
Mhm.
and been following hard after Christ. And he feels
Mhm.
like a baby Christian because he doesn't,
Wow.
8 months. And I just thought, man, there are examples like this where
Yeah.
people have gone this other way and they've seen, I can't, there's nothing here. There's no hope.
Mm.
And hopefully if they're seeking truth, there's no real good answers.
Sure.
And so
Yeah.
yeah.
That's good. That's good. That's why we never give up either, and praying for people
Mm,
and talking to them and sharing the truth with them, because you just never know how, maybe years down the road that's going to come back to haunt them in some way. And like you
mm,
said, they're going to go back and seek Jesus for who he truly is and not
yeah.
not looking for exits and stuff. But that's so good.
No.
And thanks so much for sharing a wealth of wisdom. Like, I mean, there's just so much that we can pull from this, and I appreciate you taking the time to share it. Where can everybody find and follow you on social media?
So if they were to Google Red Pen Logic with Mr. B, it'd be an Instagram account. There'd be um, you'd find TikTok, you'd find Facebook,
Mm,
all the places. Like you, I'm not on Twitter.
yeah,
People are always like, you need to be on Twitter. Well, I remember when it was a dumpster fire. I don't know if it's changed,
I
but
haven't heard it
it's,
has. Mm,
okay. So
yeah,
I'm just like you. There's so many platforms currently that,
yeah,
I'm managing. To add another one would be a lot more work. So they could do that. Also stand to reason. So how
yeah,
I pay my bills
yeah.
is Stand to Reason, which is an apologetics ministry that trains Christians, and I've been with them for the last 9 years.
Oh, okay.
And they're based in Southern California. And so I live here in Canada, but I we've worked something out where, I'm traveling and speaking and teaching with them. So
That's with
yeah,
Greg
check out
Kokel, right?
you got it,
Yeah,
Greg
I love
Kokel.
Greg. He reminds me of Sean Connery. I don't know why, he just does. He doesn't have the
Okay, I'm
actor
gonna
talk.
tell him that, and his head is going to blow
Yeah,
up
I don't know
because
why he does.
who
He just does. I've met him at CIA a couple times, and he was
oh
actually my
cool.
instructor at CIA when I had to present. So tell him if he
And
remembers the emotionalism junkie presenter, if he remembers that
okay.
for me. Yeah.
Okay, he is tough on his students at CIA.
Yeah.
So
He wasn't
he
too bad
definitely
with me. I
oh, he
thought he was,
wasn't?
that's why he
Okay.
reminds me of Sean Connery. Like he looks
Yeah.
stern but cool at the same
Yeah.
time, and he keeps that,
Yeah. Yeah.
demeanor. It's
Yeah,
good.
he is a great mentor. I tell people I want to be like Greg Kokel when I grow up. So he is I've devoured his stuff
Yeah.
since way back. I mentioned early on, when I Googled, Stand to Reason came up and
Wow.
started listening to podcasts 3 hours a week. And it was like, that's what they would record. And I was devouring them every day. It seemed like. So I just, I was getting into apologetics through Greg Kokel. Yeah. So people check out str.org, and they'll find thousands of articles and videos and you name it from me, myself, and then the rest of our team.
Yes. And I'll put all the links in the show notes. If you guys have any questions, you guys can go look at those and find where to follow Tim, where to follow or find STR, where to even find the book, The
Yeah,
Deconstruction
it's
of
on
Christianity.
Amazon. I mean,
Yeah.
everywhere books
And
are
that's
sold.
easy to order from Amazon.
Uh,
It delivers right to your home
yeah,
too.
yeah,
So,
that's right.
all right. Well, if you guys have any
Cool.
questions for me, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Tim, thanks again for being here. I appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
All right, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.